was a very lovely welcome, thank you. And it is a great privilege to be here. It was a delight to have the chance to meet Johan when you were in Australia, and I think what you talked about in your opening is the fact that we might come from different countries, and we might have different cultural attributes, but in fact we share a very common agenda. And I hope that being part of today contributes to that agenda, and I feel very privileged. I also feel very pleased and privileged to be a part of this first series that you've established in this forum, and I think you talked about the opportunity to work collaboratively, to exchange and share our views, and I think challenge each other in terms of the opportunity this profession has to make not only to our economies but to our countries across the world. Now, the topic today was something I saw after the fact in terms of preparing my presentation. This is the first time I've given this presentation. And what I'm going to do is leave the actual big data piece to the experts. And Isa from Tower Watson is, I'm sure, going to give us some very exciting news about what they're doing in respect to technology. But what I'd like to pick up is very much the focus on the topic of talent. And certainly, Johan, that was very much a part of your talk. And particularly how we can apply the insights of good HR to ensure that we are able to support the big data and make sure we maximise the potential of our organisations and our talent that we need in our workforces for the future. I want to start my presentation by talking about the concept of talent, because it's a word that we hear a lot, and it's a word that has many interpretations in many contexts. And I think if we reflect on that, no doubt human talent has mystified us and perhaps exasperated us, many people, in terms of trying to understand what talent means. And we often look at people and wonder how they can do extraordinary things and sometimes make it look so simple. But often if you ask them, they'll almost tell you that it's taken a very, very long time to develop that talent. I had the privilege of living next door to an artist, and that they said that they would paint a picture for me. And I remember sitting there while they painted this particular picture, and I made the rather foolish comment about how easy they made it look. And his response to me was, yes, but it took me 60 years to learn to make that look so easy. So I think it's really important to know that there are many perspectives on talent, and there's a great depth and reservoir when we start talking about the word talent. What I want to do is share with you some very different perspectives in relation to the word talent. And I am going to be asking your opinion across this session, so I want you to be thinking about what I'm going to be presenting from a very different point of view, and then come back and look at how talent looks when you look at it from your context. The first slide that I have, whoops, my apologies, I'll get better at the clicker in a minute, is Erica Jong. I'm not sure if any of you have had the chance. She's a novelist, and she's written novels such as Fear of Flying. She's a very famous novelist. And this is what she said about talent. Everyone has talent. What's rare is the courage to follow it to the dark places that it leads. And she presents the idea here that talent's quite common, that we all have various talents, but few of us are prepared to take the risks where we need to go in order to make something of our talent, make something bigger of our talent. And she talks about that concept of fear. And I wonder what that fear is in respect to what she's suggesting. And one thing that comes, well, one person who's very talented, who talks about the fact that a lot of people have a fear of working hard. Okay? And that's something Stephen King, I'm sure some of you are familiar with Stephen King's novels and some of his more scary movies I can't watch, such as The Shining and Carrie. He puts it this way, he says, talent is cheaper than table salt. What separates the talented individual from the successful one is a lot of hard work. I'm sure you can probably relate to that particular one. Stephen King was a struggling school teacher. He had a passion for writing books and novels, and he did that in his spare time while he was trying to put food on the table for his family. And now, of course, he's famous and wealthy, and he's become a very big success story. But he puts it down hard work as a must when it comes to doing something with our talent. And of course, there's lots of people, very talented people, and I'm sure you can think of some of these people who do far more and make a much greater contribution than you would expect in terms of their talent, something bigger than themselves. And here we look to people like Benjamin Franklin. Now, when you think about Benjamin Franklin, he was an 18th century philosopher, a scientist, and also an inventor. And he also, of course, was one of the founding fathers of the United States. And he made heaps of discovery. Electricity, we can thank him for the fact that this microphone's working and there's lights on in this room. Now, he was acknowledged as a person of many, many great talents, but he wasn't happy in just applying his talent in a single way. And he reflected on people wasting their talents and hiding them away with this very simple 2-line statement. He says, "Hide not your talent. They for use were made. What's a sundial in the shade?" We have to know what we can do when we have to find a place where we can play out our talent. And I think his metaphor of a sundial is very relevant. We all know that if a sundial's in the shade, as clever as it is, it won't work, it won't deliver, it won't contribute to telling us the time. So like Franklin and many other talented individuals we see across business and life, they actually have a competence which they work hard to develop. They also typically love what they do. Would you agree when you think about talented people? They love what they do and they're highly committed and they're very passionate about what they do. And finally, they often work to a bigger purpose than beyond their own, meeting their own individual needs. And they make a bigger contribution. And those 3 words, competence, commitment, and contribution, are 3 words that I want to talk about and work those into what I'm going to talk about in terms of a talent equation for the future. So they're my 3 C's. I'm going to have lots of trifectas today. But one last quote. Joan Crawford. How many of you know who Joan Crawford is? Okay, well, I'm going to introduce you. There's someone up the back who knows who's Joan Crawford. Okay, Joan Crawford, she was a screen actor. She was mid-20th century, and she was very stunning. And this is what she looked like. And this is what she said about talent. She said, "I think the most important thing a woman can have, next to talent, of course, is her hairdresser." Now, in Joan Crawford's case, she was a very talented actress, and she, in fact, had some humour in that statement. But it was the fact that her hairdresser worked with her to make sure she always looked glamorous. And so, in some ways, she was being a little bit funny, but she was also true, because what she knew was she was relying on her hairdresser, who was highly competent at styling her hair, who loved what she did and was very passionate about that, and who was also capable of making a contribution beyond herself. She was making a contribution to the fact that Joan was always going to look glamorous. And Joan herself knew that she was a talented actress and that rated #1. But she also knew that she relied on the talent of others to make her contribution greater. And I think that's an important piece. Now I'm going to ask you a question. And the question is, when you think about your own talent, I want you to think about it. What are the competencies that meant that you were on this invite-only list to be here today? This particular first series in the forum put together by TalentCorp. What were your competencies? What are you good at, and how committed are you to being good at that? And then secondly, what do you contribute to the agenda? And we heard about the agenda that Johan spoke about for this country. What do you contribute to that agenda that is bigger than yourself? So there's those 3 C's again. That's competence, commitment, and contribution. And those 3 C's. But of course, we're here today to talk about talent in respect to business and to the work we do every day. And for a number of years now, and of course being the CEO of an HR institute, this is very much of appeal to me, and I think it very much is a topic that relates to the profession and the members that I lead in Australia, and my contribution and involvement with associations and organisations here in the Asia Pacific region, but also around the world. Now, for a number of years, the Boston Consulting Group have been doing a series of surveys or research topics called Creating People Advantage. And they've done that at the request of the World Federation that we are a member of. Now, they've completed 2 studies. The first was in 2012 and the second was in 2014. And what they did was they surveyed 8,000 executives in over 800 countries, one of which was Malaysia. In fact, you had a very high percentage contribution when you consider the size of your country relative to those that participated. Now, in 2012, in addition to the survey work, they completed 64 in-depth interviews with HR and non-HR. And I think that's very important that we have a perspective on our profession that's not just our own, but one that comes from the outside. And they looked at 15 industry sectors, so a very broad range of people were involved. And they asked 3 questions of this group through these in-depth interviews. They asked, in respect to 22 different topic areas, they asked, how capable was your organisation in that topic area? How important was that topic area? And what future importance did you assign to that topic area? Now, the findings were that 3 of the 22 topics they discovered, 3 were in the critical zone. In other words, they were important to now and to the future for all of the organisations that they interviewed. These are 8,000 people. Do you want to guess what the first one was? Managing talent. That was number 1. Second was improving leadership and development. They're our talent as well. And the third was strategic workforce planning. Now again in 2014, the BCG asked what are the world's top priorities, and I think we all know that we've seen the rate of change. So even just between 2012 and 2014, there's been a significant change in our global economies. And once again, talent made it to the top of the list. So if you look at that circle, I'm not sure if you can see that in the back row, but talent is fairly universally number 1 again across all of those groups. Now, while we know that the drivers for its rankings will vary in terms of cultural and unique economic drivers in each of our countries, the top rating was number 1 consistently through the Americas, through the Middle East, through Africa, and through the Asia Pacific. So we share something very much in common, and it's this simple word called talent. So I think we need to better understand this word, don't you think? If it's so important to so many people, if it keeps so many CEOs awake at night, we need to understand this better. When we talk about talent, we do often hear it associated with words such as the war for talent, a talent crisis, a talent shortage. I have a question for you. When you think about talent, how do you define it in your organisation, and what are some of the words you attribute to talent when you're trying to describe it, and how your businesses are trying to manage talent? Just throw some words out at me. Is crisis one of those words? Do you use that word in your organisation, in this country? Talent frustration? Retention, talent retention. Other words that when the topic of talent gets onto the table, what are some of the words you attribute to it? Attraction? Development. Okay. And does the word crisis, does that come into the genre here in Malaysia? Yeah, it does. It does very much in Australia and very much around the world, but it's got to do with who we want to attract and how we retain them and engage them. One thing for sure, regardless of what words we use or what adverbs and how additive we might add to that word talent and how we conceptualise it, it's absolutely something that we need to consider. And certainly as the world of work is changing, we need to consider it even more, because I don't think there is a single definition. I think that's the critical piece. And it's vital, and we heard some of these words just before, that we need to know how we can identify, grow, and retain talent. So it isn't static. That's exciting, but of course that's equally challenging. As HR professionals, and again this is it's something you would expect me to say, but I think it's really true. This is both a challenge and also an opportunity. This profession, more than any other profession in my view, has the opportunity to make such a big impact on our organisations and our countries. And I think if we can match the capability of the profession to the challenge, then in fact it will be an outstanding opportunity, a partnership between our profession and our countries and our organisations. Now, a little closer to home, there was a recent survey or study commissioned by the Economic Intelligence Unit, and AHRI, along with our counterpart, SHRM, identified 7 major trends and challenges across the world. And these included global competition, the fact that exists across all of our organisations. And I noticed, in fact, it's one of the key economic drivers as far as this country is concerned, how we can create more internal competition within ourselves in order to ensure that we have the capabilities to match the market on a global level. And it's the new norm. If there's any organisation out there that thinks they don't have to compete, they don't have to innovate or be creative, I don't know what country they're living in, let alone what planet they're currently on. The other challenge, of course, we have is demographic shifts and the fact that we have constantly changing workforce patterns and a changing structure of our workforce. I was having a conversation, in fact, talking out there before, the fact that you've been in this job for 3 days. And I asked the question about what is the mobility of the workforce, and we were talking about the differentiator when you start looking at generations. I look at my kids, and they will not stay in jobs anywhere near the length of time that I've stayed in jobs, and that's just a fact. So how do we manage that in terms of attracting and retaining and engaging that talent given the different demographic drivers? Technological innovations, and I'm really looking forward to the Towers Watson presentation later, because I think it brings both threats potentially in terms of changing our workplace and changing the nature of our work and our priorities, but also enormous opportunities in relation to workforce management. And I think the next issue for me is the educational divide, the fact that we are really seeing a gap between formal education and informal education, and how we in fact manage the balance of the different forms of not only what we teach but how we teach it to make sure that it's delivering. And I think that focus on smart work, I had the opportunity to meet someone just before who was saying that there is a culture, perhaps here in Malaysia, and I think perhaps in other countries, but it was that you work very long hours. Is that something you would agree? Yeah. Okay, so it's really nice to see that one of the things that came out of the trend was in fact a focus on smart work and how we in fact are needing to aspire and are prioritising some of that work-life balance. And I think I can thank some of the generations. Again, I look at my kids and they think differently. I know when we sit around the table and if I pick up my phone, they'll reprimand me because they'll say, no, Mum, we're talking right now. And so I think some of the generational influence coming into the workforce will in fact perhaps moderate and balance, but I think sometimes we have to lead by example there. The other issue, of course, is greater equity and the opportunity we have in terms of our moral responsibility to society to better balance the balance between profit and also wages. So I think that's something that's commonly shared around the world. Now, given the complexity of these 7 items, I wanted to find a framework that I could look at that could simplify that. And the framework that I've elected to use is a framework that looks at work, workforces, and workplaces. Now, of course, you always steal the best things. Is that true? You know, I think imitation is only a fraction away from innovation, and if you find something really good. And this 3 W's has come from my colleague Peter Cheese from the CIPD. And he talks about this, and I think it provides a really simple but very effective framework that allows us to look at our workplaces. And when we talk about work, we talk about it's the role of HR in terms of shaping the job roles that will support the work into tomorrow and into the future. When we talk about the workforces, the opportunity HR has to unlock the potential of the labour market for the benefit of the organisation and the economy, and of course the society we live in. And when we talk about the workplace, we talk about the role HR can play in building a culture that supports that work and that workforce, and making sure that we have future fit leadership in terms of synchronising those 3 elements. Now, I guess I'll declare my bias again as the CEO of the HR Institute. I think HR has an enormous role to play in affecting and influencing each of these 3 elements. And I know we've only got a short period of time this morning, but I just want to focus this afternoon. I'm a little bit time mixed up. I want to look at each of those 3 W's in a little bit tiny more detail. And if we look at work, if we start off with demography, different generation, differences and how they'll play out in regards to work ethics, in regards to aspirations, styles and habits. And I think you may or may not be a fan of the generational theories, but it is a reality. And as I said, my kids will not be in jobs, they'll be in far more jobs than I'll ever be and ever see, and they'll be challenged and they'll be curious about things I may never have been curious about, and that's just a fact. And so when I think about my workforce, I need to think about the demands of those generations, and I think that the words were up there about attracting and retaining talent. In order to do that, I need to understand what will attract people. What is it that I will create in my environment in respect to work and the shape of what that job looks like that will ensure that I can attract and retain that talent. And that's complex. That's very complex. In Australia, we have got an ageing demographic, so we have more people in the older part of the workforce, and our retirement age is 5 years higher than yours. Yours has gone to 60, ours has just gone to 65. And so we are trying to work out a way to retain talent. But retaining talent at that end of the market doesn't mean necessarily having people work full-time 5 days a week, and particularly not here in Malaysia when you go home at 10 o'clock at night from your jobs. That's not going to work. One example, when I took on the job of CEO, I had written into my contract the fact that
I wanted a grandparents' day because I have 2 little grandchildren, and that's important to me. And I wanted to make sure that was built into my role, and that people were aware that that was something that was a priority for me. In terms of technology, I think the role that technology can play in transforming the idea of how work can be done, and the timeframes and the ways in which we do work. And again, I'm looking forward to Isa's presentation later on. When I first started work, the way we communicated, yes, we used the phone, but in terms of correspondence, we wrote letters. We wrote letters to each other, and we mailed them, and then we waited for the reply, and then we acted on that reply. And of course, that sounds like I lived in a different century, but I'm not that old. But it's very difficult to understand the impact technology has had on work today. And imagine if this is the impact it has now, we need to be ahead of the curve in terms of understanding how we can manage these things from an HR perspective in anticipation of the impact of technology. And of course, social factors, and the fact that there are different approaches and priorities with respect to the workplace, leisure, flexibility, family care, caring for the aged, caring for the young people, and caring for people with disability. I think that's just to name a few. If we look at the second element, we've got 3 W's, work, and the second one is the workforce. The 3 elements there, and I think there's lots of bits, and we could spend most of the day debating in terms of what are the variables that are to do with workforce, but the 3 I've chosen are knowledge and skills, and that is the difference being knowledge is what we know, and skills is how we apply that knowledge. We can all be very knowledgeable, we can have many qualifications, but it's what we do with that knowledge and how we apply that knowledge. So that's the differentiator there. Competitiveness, and again, it was fantastic to see that one of the economic attributes that you're trying to develop here is not only external competition, because that's coming at you and you have to deal with that, but how you can engender internal competition to raise the bar within your country. But the opportunity to innovate and to adapt to change. And inclusion and diversity, that was one very common agenda that, Johan, when you came to Australia, that we have very much in common. I think the idea that we can leverage off the diversity within our workforce, and that we need to maximise that ability to take the variety of talents we have in the different shapes and sizes to ensure maximum benefit. In terms of just that knowledge and skills, I just wanted to touch briefly on that because I think it's very relevant to today's topic, and it's also relevant to the fact that I have the pleasure for the first time of being in your country here today. And that is, we are really delighted to be able to be part of the initiatives in partnership with TalentCorp, HRDF, and also KPinter. And I think it's something we're particularly proud of. And I think the opportunity that you take to invest and build internal capability. AHRI does a lot of work around the country. We don't have any offices in various places. Our main aim is to make sure that we can share the intellectual knowledge and capital we have and the experiences we have, because we have been on this journey as well, and we are still on a journey, but how we can partner with people to make sure that we can grow that capability. I think one of the challenges of HR is, and I don't know if you can relate to this example, but that we often send people off for training to build up their knowledge, but then we often don't adjust the environment into which they come back to allow them to play out and practice that knowledge. So sometimes our own L&D programs are actually self-defeating. So when we think about the skills building and the knowledge building that we are investing in, we need to make sure we are adapting the workplace and the work environment to take on board those new knowledge and skills. Otherwise, people will just tuck them under their wings and not apply them. So I think, again, I'm a big advocate of the profession, but I'm equally a big challenger of the profession, because I think there's so many things we can do to grow and to maximise the benefit in our businesses. The last of the W's was workplace. And the 3 areas in relation to workplace, there are many environmental and social and technological changes, all of which need to make sure that we're being agile, adaptable and innovative, and that's critical. And using these elements, HR's role is to ensure that the workplace is able to support the changing nature of work, the first W, and to engage the breadth and needs of our diverse workforce in order to bring that to effective application inside our workplaces. Okay, so I'd like to come back now to the topic. You're probably saying, when's she going to get back to that thing about the talent equation? And now I'm going to wind it back, because I think we need to go deeper. We need to put some meat around what this word talent means and how we can
influence talent within our workplaces. And the challenge I'm going to throw out to you is how you can actually manage your own talent equation. So often when we, again, talk about talent, I talked about how people add words to talent, but we often tend to think of it as a special aptitude, something that's, someone's got a particular talent, and we often attribute it to art and sport and the like. And when you think about big organisations, every big sporting organisation, I'm sure it's the same here in Malaysia, they have things called talent scouts. They're out there always looking, trying to attract the right sort of talent. And in Australia, we have, for example, I was talking to a colleague from one of our biggest bank in Australia. They have dedicated teams, and their job is singularly to scour through LinkedIn looking for talent. So they have a focus on that. And I think you've given me some interpretations of the words and how you think of it. But I want to suggest to you the idea of an equation. And again, there's a very small gap between innovation and imitation, and I stole this idea. And I stole this from someone, a very significant thought leader in the area of HR, a man by the name of Professor Dave Ulrich from the University of Michigan. And I had a great privilege of being able to study with him earlier this year. And this is what he says about talent. He says every employee can and should be considered a talent. And it doesn't rely on the natural aptitudes or gifts that you have. And what he then talks about is the three characteristics of the talent equation. And he says the talent equation, and it is written in a formula sense, and I want you to take notice of this. He said the talent equation is equal to competence multiplied by commitment multiplied by contribution. Now, just going back to those three words, competence is your capacity to have the skills and possess the knowledge or know-how to perform the job you're employed to do. That's your competence. Commitment is the attitude you bring to work, and it includes the degree of ownership that you take in terms of the vision and the purpose of your organisation that you work for. And contribution is about being engaged and motivated to actually perform as a committed employee. And I think if we know that if someone is making a great contribution, it often comes in the form of a discretionary effort over and above. I don't think it should be working till 10 o'clock at night, but I think it is the fact that you bring more to the organisation than just showing up and sitting at your desk every day. But look at the way I've written this up. I said the talent equation is equal to competence multiplied by commitment multiplied by contribution. Because if you think of it this way, competence matters because being incompetent leads to poor decision making. And you can have all the big data in the world, but in fact, if you don't apply that data and you don't analyse that data to answer the questions, then in fact, your competence goes to waste. And of course, without commitment, again, you can be highly capable, but if you're not engaged and passionate about what you're doing, then in fact, it's discounted or devalued. Highly competent employees who are committed but don't work very hard also undervalue their ability to achieve. I think they diminish the value of their commitment and competence. Therefore, what happens to the equation? Okay, let me give you an example. See if you know anyone like this. I hope it's not you, but let's see. You know someone who's incredibly talented. Let's say they're very competent, so they're very good at that first C. They've got qualifications, they've got great amount of experience, and they're very competent. And they love coming to work every day. Okay, so they're committed, yes? But guess what? They've outgrown their role, and HR hasn't adapted that role, so they're no longer engaged. They're not challenged. So what happens? If you've got a high score on competent, and you multiply it by a high score on commitment, thank you, Ange, a little prompt. My apologies. Okay, how does that look? Does that look better? Now you can see what I'm talking about. My apologies. Okay, so if you've got a high competency, you're very, very good at what you do. Your talents, your competencies, your knowledge and your skills is high. And you love coming to work. And you love the business. But you've outgrown your role, which means you're no longer engaged. So you can have a very high first C, multiply that by a very high second C, but if you multiply it by a low contribution, what happens to the equation? It negates the whole value of the equation. Now what I'd like to see, do you know anyone like that? Do you know someone who's really just needs to change jobs? And if they can't change it internally, then maybe they shouldn't be in that organisation because you maybe can't find the challenge for them. because all three need to be operating. What Ulrich says is competence deals with the head, being able. Commitment deals with the hands and the feet, and it's about being there. And contribution is about the heart, and it's about being engaged and wanting to add value. Remember we said Benjamin Franklin went above and beyond in terms of his adding value. And again, by establishing that all of these three are multipliers of each other, if any of the variables are either missing or low, the other two won't replace it. So again, if someone loves coming to work and are busy, they work till 10 o'clock, but they actually don't have the skills to do the job that you need them to do, then what is their talent equation? Talent employees must have skills, will and purpose. They must be competent, commitment and contributing. And as HR, we are the custodians of this talent equation in our organisation. And what we saw before when we showed that data across the world, we saw that talent management is not number 2, not number 3, but number 1 in terms of the priorities of businesses around the world. And HR needs to focus on the elements of work, workforce and workplace that can impact on building and sustaining a strong talent culture. In other words, we can't just employ people and assume it will just happen. And we need to provide them with the resources environment to grow their competence and to remain competent. And there's two different things, isn't it? We hire someone in, but I've just said to you, work changes, the workplace changes. So in fact, someone's competence today, 6 months from now, is not necessarily going to be the same. So it is an ongoing, continuing process. We need to be able to provide the resources and environment to develop commitment to the purpose of the organisation. So build that value proposition, build that culture that will sustain the organisational strategy that you have in place, and create the resources and environment that will enable people to make a real contribution. Employees who do the bare minimum may help the enterprise struggle on. They may help it get by. But those who exhibit these 3 characteristics that make up the talent equation represent the talent that we need and want to retain to make our enterprise truly competitive. Now, that isn't about producing automatons or one size fits all, and I think the point that Johan made in the opening statements is we need to embrace inclusion and diversity, and we need to make sure that we are diverse organisations so that we can draw on that innovation and creativity that comes from that diverse workforce. But what it does mean, that it takes time and effort to create a purpose-fit culture in order to sustain our businesses. And that's a big job for HR and a big job for HR managers. Certainly it's a big job for my members and it's a big job for the profession in order to make a contribution to our economies and to our countries. But equally, I'm going to suggest that we are the custodians of our own talent equation, and that we need to take ownership of our own talent equation. Whether you be at entry level in the organisation, whether you be the HR manager of the organisation, or whether you be the CEO of an organisation, I take responsibility for my own talent equation. And where there is support, and I think it's fantastic the initiatives here that we're observing within the auspice of your vision for 2020, I think it still requires an individual to take advantage of those opportunities and to put the energy forward to maximise each of those. My point is that we need to take that responsibility and we need to work on each of those C's. Number 1, we need to invest in our own competency and capability and proactively seek out those opportunities for stretch and engagement. Don't wait for someone to come to you and say, you look terribly bored. What can I do to restructure your job? If you are looking for new ways, now that doesn't mean you ask for the CEO's job on day 3. That's just a little reminder, because we know there's quite a few people who ask those questions in the first interview. But it does mean that we need to actively, we don't wait for our employers necessarily to make our talent equation work. We take ownership of that talent equation. In relation to the second C, we check our own commitment. We check our own commitment to make sure that it's configured in a way that we are maximising our engagement and our productivity. Angelina and I recently participated in some training, and the trainer used an analogy. Do you all know what the ACL joint is? Any athletes in here who've done their ACL joint at different times? Okay, it's a joint in the knee, I believe, and I think it hurts when you do bad things to it. But the A stands for accept, the C stands for change, and the L stands for leave. And the concept of the ACL joint is that when we make decisions in respect to our own decisions about our work, we have a choice. If we don't like the circumstances or the work or perhaps the environment, we can seek to make change. We can try and change ourselves, if that's actually the issue, or we can seek to influence and change those around us. But if we can't change, then we've got a choice. We either accept or we leave. Now, leave might mean looking at a different role within the organisation. It might in fact mean leaving the organisation. But that's okay. That's okay, because there is nothing more damaging to your own personal talent equation or to the talent culture or the energy within the organisation if you play in those spaces between A, C and L. Because if you don't make a choice, then you are having conversations with others, perhaps conversations with yourselves, which means you aren't managing your talent equation. You are letting this happen to you. So I take this very seriously, and I expect my HR manager to help me manage the talent in my small organisation. I expect my managers to assist with managing the talent equation in my organisation, but I absolutely expect every person in my organisation to manage their own talent equation as well. Now, when we think about that equation, can you think that when we're doing performance management, it's obviously sometimes one of the most onerous tasks people think, because they think they've got to manage this person, and they think of it as a whole thing that they've got to manage. But suddenly when you look at that talent equation and you look at the element of competence, or you look at the element of commitment or contribution, if you performance manage those aspects, suddenly it's a little bit different. If someone, you think, oh, they're just not working out. But if I isolate it, and I actually say, well, what's not working out is that I promoted them and I moved them from a position where they were competent because I knew they loved the organisation and they were doing a wonderful job. But now, I just don't think they're doing a good job. What part of the talent equation did I upset through that process? Competency. I perhaps promoted them to a position where they didn't have the skills. And do we ever do that? Do we ever promote people? Sometimes we do. The most talented specialists, we often say, yes, we'll give you a management job and we'll give you a leadership job. So I think if you can break down, when you're looking at performance management, you say, am I dealing with an attitude? Am I dealing with a lack of engagement? Do I need to reconstruct the role in a way in which they can feel as if they're making a greater contribution? Remember, if you aren't making a contribution, you're not engaged. You can love the company, you can be as competent as whatever, but you're not going to feel engaged. So when we're performance managing, if we look at our talent equation this way, suddenly we can perhaps find some training that might be a solution to a competency issue. Okay? Or we can do some job redesign if it's a contribution issue. The commitment one's a little bit harder, isn't it? Okay, if someone can't connect to your values and your principles as an organisation, then you've got a different discussion. But it does mean that we can performance management a little bit better. The important thing is if we find out which one we need to work on, then in fact we don't need to lose the other two C's. Okay, if we've got someone who's hugely committed and someone who's very capable, and all we have to do is think about their role and how they've been contributing, then in fact we're not going to lose the other two great elements, because the points were made in the audience before. It's about attracting talent to our organisations. It's absolutely about engaging those. And of course the custodian of all that is HR. Now this is a perspective that I share personally. You get the sense I'm a little bit passionate about this and the responsibility, but also the opportunity that comes through this particular thought process. But we know that this is a common thing with our members. Many of our members are involved in big business. We also do quite a lot of work in the area of small business. And one thing that is common between big and small businesses, again, whether they're in the private sector or small government organisations or big government departments, they are all interested in this. And this is the last trifecta. I've had 3 trifectas so far. People plus productivity equals profitability. And I don't think I need to explain this formula because I think it's relevant regardless of the size of organisation, regardless of the sector you work in. And I don't think sometimes people think of profitability as in fact, oh, well, I don't work for an organisation that seeks to make a profit or has shareholders. But profitability is a measure in terms of value and worth. And so it's as relevant in the public sector when we're talking about the provision of government services or provision of services to our communities. It's the combination of those two things that come together and make us successful. And I think at the end of the day, it's how we collectively ensure positive work outcomes for our organisation. And I think the regardless of the cultural variables, it doesn't really matter, that might differentiate our countries. At the end of the day, this is what we're all striving to do. We're striving to ensure that we have a sustainable competitive advantage. And one of the challenges with initiatives, and often government initiatives or other community initiatives, is they're difficult to sustain. And that's where I believe we have a responsibility at a government level, we have a responsibility at an organisation level, and also an individual level. So in terms of my organisation and what we're focused on, we're the professional association for HR in Australia. We have about 20,000 members, and just recently we identified a new set of pillars as far as what we're concerned and what our focus is. And I won't labour these, but we're very much about being a member career partner. And that's a member career partner from those that are students studying to take on ambition inside the profession, to many of our senior HR practitioners who aren't joining AHRI in order to learn more, but are joining AHRI in order to give back to the profession and sustain the profession. We're about the HR community. That 6 degrees of separation is so true, and I think the profession is very young, and I think it's important that we all work collegiately to grow our profession and to raise our capability, because I think it is one of the most significant partners to business and certainly to the future of our economies and our countries. Intellectual capital is our second pillar. We have a responsibility to make sure that we're trying to continually grow our intellectual capital and influence the agenda. We aren't funded by the government, we're a not-for-profit association, but we are looked to do research and advocacy on key things that affect all of our companies and organisations in Australia. Solutions are a very important part of what AHRI does. We run many things, we have many partnerships with lots of organisations, because HR needs a whole lot of tools and services. And I know Towers Watson are one of those providers of tools and services to assist our members. And finally, we need to make sure that we're a very sound business and we have the right infrastructure to carry the profession forward. And I'm delighted to be here. As I said, I'm very delighted to have Angelina Pillay talk about 6 degrees of separation. Here we have Angelina back in her own country, being part of a shared and mutual agenda. It's fantastic to have Angelina with me. So in conclusion, I think the focus of my presentation has been that perhaps what we thought was the way things were in the past is no longer, and the world is rapidly changing. That's nothing new. And I think, I don't know how many of you have seen some of the Shift Happens videos on YouTube. If you just type that in, there are a million different, not really a million, there might be a million actually, there's so many there, but they are mind-blowing in terms of the exponential rate of change that is coming at us. And I think as far as the 3 W's that I introduced earlier, this one that came out of one of those Shift Happens videos is still very pertinent when we talk about our work, our workplace and our workforce. And this comes from the US Department of Labour, that today's learners will have 10 to 14 jobs by the age 38. 1 out of 4 workers today is working for a company for whom they have been employed less than a year. That messes up your data, doesn't it, your turnover ratios? For each student starting a 4-year degree, half of what they learn in that first year will be outdated by the 3rd year of study. And that the top 10 jobs in demand today didn't exist 10 years ago. And finally, we are currently preparing students for jobs that don't yet exist, using technologies that haven't yet been invented in order to solve problems we don't even know about. That's fairly a significant set of dot points in terms of trying to frighten us, but at the same time, I think we should be excited about the opportunity. And as the CEO of the HR profession in Australia, I am excited for this profession. And I think the opportunities that I've talked about are not unique to my country or to my organisations in Australia. They're things that we share in common. And that through our work collaboratively, we can help shape the work and the workforces and workplaces of the future. I congratulate those in the audience, and I think there's many of them here who have chosen the HR profession as your career. And even though you may have many other jobs, I hope that you stick with this profession, because I think it's got the most enormous opportunity to make a difference to our organisations and to our countries. And for those that are business leaders here, I implore you to draw upon the expertise of your HR professionals to support your strategy and your businesses for the future, because together I think we can in fact shape the future. Thank you very much.